Welcome to Life Stories, where true tales of resilience, love, and quiet transformation come to life. Today's story is about a billionaire who discovered his maid studying late at night and uncovered a secret that would change both of their lives forever. It's a story of courage born in silence, of a dream carried in the dark, and of the quiet power of belief. Subscribe now to Life Stories to begin today's unforgettable journey. Let's step into the warmth of a kitchen light, and witness how one quiet moment became the start of everything. It was the kind of night that swallowed sound. The grand estate, once vibrant with life and laughter, now rested under a heavy blanket of silence. Only the old grandfather clock in the hallway dared to speak, its chimes marking the passage of time like distant echoes of memories. It was 2 a.m, an hour when most of the world had given itself over to dreams. Jonathan Hale descended the staircase barefoot, his robe draped loosely over his shoulders. The cool marble beneath his feet and the faint creak of the wooden railing were his only companions. He hadn't intended to wander, but sleep had become more of a stranger than a friend in recent years. Since his wife passed, the nights felt longer, the silence deeper. There had been a time, what now seemed a lifetime ago, when music filled the house. When the soft rustle of pages and her laughter lit up these walls. But grief had its way of hollowing things out. And now his nights were little more than rituals. Tea at 9. Solitude by 10. Insomnia by midnight. As he rounded the corner into the kitchen, Jonathan stopped. A faint light spilled from the room, warm and golden, and there, seated at the marble island, was Elena. She was hunched over a thick textbook, her uniform partially covered by a worn sweater. A pencil was tucked behind one ear. Scattered around her were stacks of medical books, a spiral-bound notebook filled with scrawled notes, and carefully drawn anatomical diagrams. For a long moment, he didn't speak. She hadn't noticed him, too immersed in a world far removed from laundry and floor polish. Finally, he cleared his throat gently. Elena jumped, snapping her book shut. Her eyes widened in alarm. I'm sorry, sir, she stammered, rising to her feet. I didn't think anyone would be awake. Jonathan raised a hand. It's fine, he said softly. I just came down for some water. But, what are you doing? She hesitated, eyes dropping to the table. Studying, she whispered. I have a placement exam tomorrow. For an online program. If I pass, I might be able to enroll in remote courses. It's a long shot, but I have to try. Jonathan's eyes drifted to the book closest to him. Advanced Human Biology. He looked back at her. You want to be a nurse? Elena looked up, and for the first time, he saw it. Something fierce and alive behind her usually modest gaze. A doctor, she said. Her voice, though quiet, held a conviction that surprised him. I've wanted that since I was a child. She told him, haltingly, about her father, how he'd grown ill when she was just 10. How they had no money for proper treatment. He died at home, and she remembered sitting beside him. Helpless, she had promised herself she'd never feel that powerless again. Jonathan listened without interrupting. It wasn't just the story, it was her presence. She didn't speak like someone asking for pity. There was no bitterness in her tone. Only quiet resolve. You're tired, he said after a pause. Yes, she admitted. But you're still studying? A nod. Every night. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. She wasn't just the maid who ironed his shirts and washed the windows. She was more courageous, tenacious, a light in his otherwise dim world. He gestured gently. Don't let me interrupt. You have an exam to pass. She blinked, stunned. Then slowly, gratefully, she sat down again and opened her book. As Jonathan turned to leave, he looked back at her, this young woman with nothing but a flickering desk lamp and a fierce, unyielding dream. And for the first time in years, something stirred in his chest. Not grief, not loneliness, something else. Hope. Elena's days began before the sun dared to rise. By 5 a.m., she was already awake. her hands steady as she brewed coffee in the quiet kitchen, folded linens with practiced grace, and organized shelves that no one would notice. She was the kind of presence that lived in the background, quiet, efficient, invisible. Jonathan began to see her more clearly after that night, not just in the kitchen where her dreams flickered in soft lamplight, but throughout the estate. He noticed how she polished the marble with careful, rhythmic strokes, how she greeted the gardener with a small nod and once left a bomb by his tools after hearing him complain about sore knees. She moved through his world with an awareness that others, with louder voices and grander titles, never possessed. But Elena never asked for more. Not for recognition, not for time, not for help. Her textbooks were secondhand, her notes scribbled on the backs of old receipts. Her only light came from a desk lamp that flickered when the air conditioner kicked in. Yet she pressed on, rewinding online lectures on medical ethics, muttering Latin root words under her breath, memorizing symptoms long after the rest of the house had gone to sleep. One day, Jonathan made a phone call. It was to an old friend, Dr. Simmons, who ran a community outreach program at a hospital downtown. That Saturday, Elena found herself summoned to the library, not the kitchen or garden, but the library, where staff rarely stepped foot. "There's a clinic I've worked with for years," Jonathan said, sliding a folder across his desk. "They've agreed to let you volunteer. You'll shadow nurses, assist with patients, just a few hours every Saturday." Elena's mouth parted in disbelief. "A real hospital?" He gave a small nod. "Think of it as training for the road ahead." Her hands trembled as she took the folder. "Thank you. I'll work hard. I promise." "I know you will," he said. And so, every Saturday, Elena boarded a crowded bus to the heart of the city. She tied her hair neatly, wore her plainest clothes, and entered the hospital with eyes wide open. She took blood pressure readings, comforted nervous children, filled out forms for elderly patients who couldn't read English. Her kindness was not performative, it was instinctual. At the end of her first day, the head nurse asked, "You said this is your first time in a hospital?" Elena nodded, suddenly unsure. "You've got better instincts than some of our interns." Elena didn't answer. She just smiled. The kind that came from deep inside, the kind you can't fake. Meanwhile, Jonathan said nothing, but every Saturday night, a cup of tea waited outside her door, still warm. Then, one Thursday afternoon, she was called to the library again. This time, there was a letter, a full scholarship, a real pre-medical program, labs, lectures, professors, a future. She stared at it for a long time. "I didn't apply," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Jonathan said gently. "I did, because I see who you are becoming." And for the first time, Elena allowed herself to believe it might be true. The night after receiving the scholarship, Elena sat at her small desk. The acceptance letter spread open beside her calculator. Her hands moved methodically, scribbling numbers on the back of a crumpled envelope. Tuition was covered. Yes. But the rent for her mother's place in Texas wasn't. Nor were her mother's medications. Or the school fees for her younger siblings. Every dollar she earned as a maid had a purpose. A destination. If she left to study full-time, the thread holding her family together might unravel. The next morning, she asked to speak with Jonathan. They sat in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids and filtered sunlight. Elena held the letter tightly, as though it might dissolve in her hands. "I don't think I can go," she said softly. "Not now." Jonathan looked at her, calm and quiet. "Why not? I send money home every week. If I stop working, my family, they'll have nothing. I can't be selfish." He leaned forward. "What you call selfish, I call brave." She shook her head. "They need me more than the world needs another doctor." He stood, walked to her, and gently placed a hand on hers. "You've given your whole life to helping others survive. But if you let your dream go, you'll keep surviving. Elena, you'll never get to live." She looked down, her eyes brimming. "No one's ever said that to me before." "I mean it," he replied. "Maybe it's time someone else carried some of the weight. Maybe it's time you became the person you were meant to be. The words sank in slowly, like sunlight warming frozen earth. She thought of her father, of her mother's hollow cheeks, her sister's drawings of a woman in a white coat. And for the first time, she imagined herself not as someone merely getting by, but as someone arriving. "I'll do it," she whispered. Jonathan smiled, quiet and proud. Then the world just got luckier. When Elena stepped onto the campus of the Medical Foundation program weeks later, she felt like an intruder. Students spilled out of luxury cars, their backpacks sleek and their confidence louder than anything she wore. She shrank into her sweater, clutching her scholarship ID like a shield. She didn't speak much in her first anatomy class, didn't laugh at the professor's jokes. She watched, listened, learned, quietly, but relentlessly. Then one day, during a group case study, she raised her hand. "The symptoms, they align with job syndrome," she said softly. The room went still. "That's correct," the professor said, eyebrows raised. The whispers changed after that. Students started asking her questions. Professors began to remember her name. Elena never sought attention. She simply kept showing up. Day after day, with purpose and care. She wrote Jonathan letters. Not emails, real letters. Folded neatly, handwritten, filled with updates and gratitude. He never replied, but he read every word, pinning them to a corkboard in his study like reminders of what belief could build. Years later, Elena returned to the estate, not with a mop in her hand, but with a white coat over her arm. She had become who she was always meant to be. And someone had believed in her, long before the world ever did. Elena's clinic stood on a quiet corner in Queens, a modest building with 5 rooms, a worn welcome mat, and a mural painted by neighborhood kids that read, "Hope lives here." It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. She offered care to those often forgotten, undocumented families, new mothers with no insurance, children who'd never seen a doctor before. The waiting room was always full. So was her heart. She never named the person who funded the clinic. There was no plaque, no spotlight, but every month, the rent was paid, the supplies arrived, and in her heart, she knew, Jonathan hadn't stopped believing. One autumn evening, he visited. He looked older now, a little thinner, but his gaze was steady as ever. They sat on a bench outside the clinic, watching the mural catch the sunset. "They think the building's magic," Elena said with a soft smile. Jonathan looked at the laughter and drawings around them. "Is it?" "In a way," she replied. "It was built on something stronger than concrete." He didn't speak, but he reached for her hand and held it, gently, wordlessly. It wasn't romance. It was something deeper, a bond forged in silence, belief, and unspoken love. Some stories don't end in grand declarations. Some begin in the quiet glow of a kitchen light and grow into a life neither person expected. A life shaped by kindness, resilience, and the unwavering courage to see someone, not for who they are, but for who they could become. Elena had once whispered her dream in the dark. Now, she lived it in the light. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful journey. If this story moved you, subscribe to Life Stories for more true-to-heart tales of hope, transformation, and the quiet strength found in the most unexpected places. Your next favorite story is just one click away.